directing exploration, how games guide players without tutorials. So we'll see how he guide his video, because with this title, it could go both ways. Either because the title directing exploration for me is how do games make open worlds and make you direct your gaze or your exploration toward certain points of interest, right? But then how game player without tutorials seems to me as how do designers teach players how to play a game without tutorials. So we'll see how he takes the game, like the idea towards, but we'll see. Interesting topic for sure.
A ton of games are usually about going on some kind of journey, but how do we know where we're going? What do games do to point us in the right direction? Most games don't necessarily need to do a whole lot for players to have an idea of where to go, but the way to efficiently present this can depend on how linear or open a game is. The way most games are structured falls somewhere on a spectrum of two extremes, linear and open-ended. For the purposes of this video, we'll be classifying games under three broad categories: linear, open-ended, and in between these two, semi-linear.
Right.
On the linear extreme, we have games like Uncharted and Star Fox 64. These games are similar to theme park attractions, often taking players through elaborate corridors and set pieces. Traditional exploration is not really the focus of linear games. Instead, they're more about providing either a specific challenge to the player or unfolding a traditional narrative.
So I guess he'll be talking a little bit more on how open exploration games, do that as to guiding us. So it is kind of the first assumption that I had.
On the open-ended extreme, we have games like Skyrim and Minecraft, which are usually large sandboxes where players are free to explore and engage with the world however they see fit with little limitation. For many of these games, exploration is the game. Now, between linear and open-ended games, we have what we'll call semi-linear games, which, as you might guess, are a mix of both worlds. The games that fall right in the middle under this category would include games like Dark Souls and Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Often the goals in these games are very straightforward, but there is an emphasis on exploration. The category a game may fall under can have a major influence on how it can efficiently direct its players. For the remainder of this video, we are going to take a brief analysis of three different games that each fit into these three categories.
Well, I mean, I'll probably talk about this because some ideas about it.
We will discuss how each visually
how
directs the player on where to go within the first few seconds of gameplay. And interestingly enough, all three of these games can be found on the original Nintendo Entertainment System.
Yeah, so obviously the linear games are very simple. Usually they are coupled with a focus on a story, right? If you, like he showed Uncharted images. So if you take Uncharted, it's simple. You just follow the story. It's more like it will be closer to playing a very interactive movie in the sense that it's not a telltale. It's not like, a visual novel, but it is. You are the one doing most of the action, but you are just following the story along, right? It's not really open-ended. Although newer Uncharted do have like open zones, it is mostly linear in that sense. You know exactly what you have to do because your next objective is steal this thing or reach this area or survive and reach the other place or whatever, right? And obviously with the big difference is when he showed like Castlevania games. I'm not a big fan of Castlevania games, but usually there is a clear objective and then you are basically blocked, and it's more of a back and forth in order to unlock everything you need to be able to progress through the main, because in a way there's kind of like a main corridor, and each corridor, and at the end of the throughout that corridor there's different rooms, but then each room requires a different key, and then you explore the other corridors in order to find those keys and kind of progress through that main corridor in a way. And then games like Skyrim and everything, obviously they tend to have a main story as well, but I feel like most players avoid the main story at the beginning at least, and then kind of do that. And I think the way that those games do is, well, they first make it so that you are, if you take Skyrim, I think they almost overdo it. It's like if you play just a little bit, you will start accumulating a massive amount of quests to do, which in my opinion is a bit too much. almost, right? You don't even like there's things that you can go to a tavern and ask for quests and stuff, and I feel like it's almost unnecessary because of the amount of quests that you're getting to, and I think Oblivion does it slightly better in that respect. But anyways, let's keep watching.
These include Super Mario Brothers, Metroid, and The Legend of Zelda. This holy trinity of Nintendo each fit within these categories and effectively convey their respective goals the moment that the player hits start. So let's begin by taking a brief look at
what he said about The Legend
Super
of Zelda,
Mario
but I
Brothers.
don't necessarily 100%
One thing to keep in mind
that.
is that being a launch title for the original NES, Super Mario Brothers was designed as an introduction to video games for millions of people. And the way that it almost effortlessly teaches its players through level design alone reflects this
That
fact.
is definitely true.
You don't need a manual to understand how to play Super Mario Brothers, and the first screen shows us this.
We definitely talked about it in the previous video, where this game is actually very, very good about how the design of the levels is extremely good at teaching players different mechanics and the different things, right? The fact that there is a high chance by you jumping over an enemy, you might hit the first, interrogation block, etc. It's like it teaches you stuff very well. The fact that there was that enemy that kind of bounces that we talked about in last episode. All right, and that is true. That it is.
Notice where the player character is faced.
Incredibly good.
On the left, facing right. The composition of this screen is saying one thing to the player: go right. A thing that you'll be doing for 99% of this entire game. But what is really worth knowing
you can see
is
there,
that
he
once
jumped to
Mario
try to avoid it,
moves
but he hit
towards
the
the
block
center of
and
the
also
screen,
killed the enemy.
the camera begins to follow him, placing him at the center of the screen, which makes the purpose of the first screen more clear. This deceptively simple use of spacing at the start does wonders in literally directing a new player to move forward. Now with this knowledge, let's move on to our semi-linear game, 1986's Metroid. Now compared to Mario, how does Metroid start?
Fair enough. You have the choice between going left or right.
It's a bit different, right? Unlike Mario, the player character, who is named Samus, is placed not on the left side of the screen, but at the center. Well, slightly off center, but we'll come back to that later. Anyway, being at the center, the player is now presented with two paths, left or right. Let's pretend that Mario is the only other game we've played, so we stick to what we know and move to the right. Moving to the right, we encounter some enemies, make a few jumps, shoot through some doors, until we come across a space that is too small for us to pass through. We can no longer progress this way, so logically we go back the way we came.
And this is what I was mainly talking about. I mean, a lot of games do this, as in the going to the right usually is kind of the main direction you're supposed to go. It's very rare that a game does the opposite, where the main direction is left. And that, I don't know, seems to be like a common thing at this point. I don't know why exactly. I guess most people left to right. That's probably the reason, but I'm not sure. And this is what I meant, right? So going right is the main corridor, but then you have to go left in order to he reached the main. In this case, it's not a key; it's an ability, but it works the same way. Like you unlock that ability, and that allows you to progress through that main corridor. So it goes back to what I was saying,
where we see a stairway and a space similar to the one that we saw earlier. Beyond the stairway, we find a small area with a flashing orb in the center. With no other options, the player naturally goes to collect the orb, which gives us a new ability to change into a ball form, which is our only way out of both here and the area that blocked us earlier. And already, Metroid has established...
And one of the things as well is that the designers almost want you to first find that blockade before you actually get the ability, because then it's a clear, I know what this ability is for. If you do it the other way around, you're like, sure, now I can become smaller, but you don't have a clear idea as to what to do.
The core of what the player does for a majority of the game. Progress through the world in a somewhat linear fashion while exploring the available areas for hidden paths and new abilities to get even further in the world. All without the player ever needing to look at the manual or read a piece of dialogue. And going back to the first moments of the game, remember how Samus was placed off-center to the left? Well, that was a subtle way to nudge players into the direction of the power-up, which would save the player a few seconds if they chose to go that way.
I actually disagree with this.
While there is a linear progression to Metroid, it's a game that you can only progress by exploring every nook and cranny for new abilities to reach new areas, and this first area is brilliantly designed to get
for me, the reason that it was placed to the left is actually the opposite. Is the same reason why Mario is placed to the left at the beginning of the game. It's because if you have more space to the right, you'll move to the right. As simple as that. I actually think it's more that way, but unless we talk to the actual developers, we will never know. But in my opinion, that's what I say. It makes more sense that you first find the blockade, right, the door, before you actually find the key. That is the logical idea how most games are made.
Get that idea across to the player. Now, for our final example, we'll be looking at one of the first major attempts at open world game design, The Legend of Zelda. Similar to Metroid, we are placed at the center of the screen, but now we look at the game from a top-down perspective. We have also upgraded from 2 paths to a whopping 4. Left, up, right, and a black square that represents a cave. Based on the contrast of the cave entrance, the player is more likely to go here first.
That yes, 100%.
Inside the cave, the player is given a wooden sword which allows them to fight off enemies that they'll encounter on every other path. If the player goes off without grabbing the sword, they'll likely come back here at some point, whether they died or they feel that they can't handle the enemies out there. Now, once the player has their weapon, they're free to explore a pretty large portion of the world in the pursuit of secrets, dungeons, and treasure. Now, while this is somewhat similar to how Metroid was structured, there is way more emphasis on both exploration and discovery. There isn't really a straightforward path, and the opening screen reflects this nature. So, now that we've gone over...
But I also agree that for me, it's a bit too similar to Metroid. As in, I would not even consider it a... Because maybe this game is a bit more like this. I feel like other Zelda games end up being less open-ended. This one, it's true that the first Legend of Zelda, it is true that it is very... It throws you in, and you do have a ton of paths to go towards. But what ends up happening is, whatever path you go, you'll end up finding some kind of quote-unquote door, some kind of blockade, something that you cannot progress. And in that available area that you have to explore, you have the object that allows you to progress. So in a way, for me, it kind of works the same way as a Metroid. It's just that the available area that you have to explore is bigger. And there is definitely a higher emphasis in gameplay in the exploration itself, right? But other than that, I feel like it works the same way as a Metroid. Because if you take a very open-ended games like Skyrim or Oblivion or whatever the Elder Scrolls series or even Fallout, there is no such things as blockades. There's no door that you can't go through, unless you have abilities. There is, of course, certain doors that are blocked by keys and require you to have keys, or certain events happen, but those are usually because they're locked with a quest or whatever, with a specific event. But other than that, there's no abilities that allow you to explore you can explore the entire world from the beginning, from the very beginning. There is, of course, a level thing, right? You need to get better, because otherwise you'd probably die in many of the locations. But so that is really what an open-ended game is, and I believe, for me, all of the Legend of Zelda are more Metroid. For me, I'm more Metroid-like, although they also simply called Zelda-like, I guess. But it's
over these three
for
structures.
Me, it's pretty much a similar
we now know
idea.
That depending on how a game is structured, whether it's linear or open-ended, should be reflected upon how the game presents itself to the player. Many of the fundamentals that these examples displayed have continued and evolved, from Mario to Crash Bandicoot to Uncharted, from Metroid to Symphony of the Night to Dark Souls.
Although again, if you compare Metroid to Symphony of the Night, for example, they are pretty much the exact same idea, right? Pretty much. Yeah, of course, visuals, the story, the setting is completely different. But other than that, the gameplay loop, to some extent, is exactly the same.
From Zelda to Shadow of the Colossus to Skyrim, the influence of level design and the sense of direction is still there and continues to evolve and change. Now, at some point in a future video, I would like to dive into the nitty-gritty of the other ways that games direct the player, but for now, think about this. Next time you're playing a game, think about how that game might be leading you on, particularly if that game is open-ended. You might be surprised by just how subtle or direct a game can be.
in open-ended games. So he didn't get into the topic, which I feel it's the most interesting thing, is how they actually direct your exploration in open-ended games. And when you talk about games like Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls in general, or any big open world game in similar, like it would work with Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild as well. The way that they do it is they try to give you as many quote unquote vistas as possible, in the sense that if you take Skyrim, the beginning of Skyrim is slightly different, I guess, because once you get out of once you get out of the cave, I guess, you're just presented with a valley, but not necessarily a very strong vista or very strong landmark to go towards, which is interesting. Usually they do that. If you take Oblivion, for example, there is two big landmarks. First one, just in front of you, there is a ruin, right? And I feel like the first time every single player plays Oblivion, they will go to that ruin, right? They'll just explore that ruin because it's a ruin. There's enemies just straight as soon as you leave the prison, right? And then the other big vista is as soon as you turn around, there is a massive city. And it's like, I have to go there, right? You have to go there. And then slowly, as you progress, you start getting quests, and then those are kind of what guiding you. And obviously, what Skyrim does, for example, is you have a little town. If you follow the road, you get to a little town. And there is also like the compass that does tell you, for example, it directs you to the totems, to the stones, right? Very quickly. But for example, in this shot, which is why I stopped it here, obviously, you're what really draws you is the mansion at the end of the castle, or however you want to call it, Dragon's Reach, which it's obvious. That's how you game do it. And if you look at Breath of the Wild, it's the same thing. A lot of the times you end up in high places, which is also why the Ubisoft thing of going to high places and unlocking kind of the map works so well. It's because it allows you to look at the world, at this open world game where you could go anywhere you want from a higher perspective, and that clearly draws your attention to the different landmarks. For example, a lot of Ubisoft games actually do it so that the camera kind of moves around and zooms into the different things, and I personally don't like that. I think that's completely unnecessary, because you're already going to be drawn to them naturally, right? If you see an interesting building at the end, or something on fire, whatever, you'll be interested and you'll go. And yeah, so, and the other thing I wanted to talk about is the guy mentioned Minecraft as an open, it's clearly super open-ended, right? It's very late into development that they added the end, right? And the actual kind of like, yeah, the end, as in you have like an end thing to do, like an end boss. But before that, the game was pretty much do whatever you want, explore, get resources, improve your house, and that's basically it. Get stronger by just getting better resources, and that's basically what the game was. But yeah, and this is one of the things. This is actually a reason why I really, really like. I really enjoyed Valheim. So Valheim, for those who don't know, it's also a survival crafting game, basically. In the veins, survival crafting game, the genre the Minecraft started, I guess, to some extent. And what I really, really like about that game is that, so it works the same way as you have an open world. You have to explore, you can improve your house, you can make your stuff, you can get better resources, better stuff. But every single moment in the game, you have a clear objective. You start the game and you spawn nearby some totems, and in those totems you have the first boss that you have to kill. It tells you directly, oh, you need to bring me 5 of these items, and I'll do something, right? And I'm sure at the beginning you don't know, but you start your game, you explore a little bit, you get the items, and suddenly it spawns the boss. And as soon as you finish that boss, it tells you, in this specific biome, there is the next objective. And that's it directly tells you what to do. And of course, that biome, there's multiple of those biomes, probably the closest you have, and that's basically it. And that's why I really like it, because it still has this open-ended, very, very like exploration focus, but at the same time, it has a very, very clear objective. Because sometimes, I mean, I love Minecraft, I've played it a lot, but sometimes in games like that, unless you're someone who's creative or have ideas as to what to do, you're not really you're not gonna do anything, right? Because but what ends up happening with me and Minecraft is I start the game and I say, well, I try to find first to have a whole time of where I just walk around trying to find a nice place to be. Then once I find it, usually close to a town, but not necessarily in the town itself, then I have ideas of how I want to make my house, right? I want to have a library for enchanting. I want to have, I like nice different rooms, etc., like a kitchen, blah, blah, blah. And I want to have a nice farm. I want to have some animals, etc. And so then I work towards that. I never really care about the end whatsoever. And then once I achieve that and I have a house that I'm happy with, that I should probably, and then I kind of lose the interest of the game. And of course I could, improve my house and make it even bigger and stuff, but that's usually how the thing ends. So in Valheim, you have that plus then the bosses, which are a clear objective as to you can spend as much as you want, making your house and making it bigger and improving your stuff. But you have this clear objective as to where to go, what to do, what to explore, and what to expect, I guess. And I really like that from Valheim. So yeah. So sadly, I think he missed the point of the interest of directing exploration, because he just talked about the different types of games, which is maybe he does it in. Actually, we'll check that, because maybe he does it in other videos, because he did mention he would. Not really. At least not directly after, I guess. But yeah, because for me, the very interesting thing is that how do you make players traverse that open world and without being overwhelmed. Actually, that is also true. The first time I played Oblivion, I explored that ruin, like I said, but then after that I was actually a bit lost. I was like, I don't necessarily want to do the main quest yet. Plus, like, the actual main quest is like in the town, like far away, so it's not like the town next to you, so it is not something you're very close to. So I was like, I don't want to walk all the way there, right? So I was actually a little bit, so what should I do, right? I'm a bit lost in that sense. And slowly I started getting the game, and now I really loved it. But I remember at the beginning being a little bit like, what am I supposed to do? And it was almost like a great experience in that way. But yeah. Anyways, so that was it. Of course, I could talk about this directing exploration idea for a long, long time as well. But it's been 25 minutes already, almost. So I guess that's going to be it. So thanks for watching, and we'll talk about more topics. Again, if you want me to do a video purely on this topics, by the way, let me know, because I'll talk about it. Like I say, usually I'm not an expert on these things, but I definitely have a lot of things to say. And like the reason I'm making these videos as well is because I believe that these things are worth discussing, and I'm not going to necessarily agree with everything he says either, right? Which is why I think they're very interesting in the first place. So yeah, anyways, so thanks for watching, and let me know if you're interested in the video, and see you next time. Bye bye.